Good morning, Honorable Chair, members of the Board of Supervisors, David Spar and Darby Marshall from Economic Development and Housing from Monterey County. We have a board referral report for you, and this report is broken into two sections. The first will deal with answering the questions on how are we meeting the goals of the housing element, and then the second one is, and the challenges of meeting the housing element, and the second one really deals with preparing for Senate Bill 2, which is a $75 transaction fee that can be used for affordable housing. And Senate Bill 3, which is a $4 billion, $3 billion bond issue that passes on the ballot, and our sites are shovel-ready and prepared, we will be eligible to apply for those funds and use them for affordable housing here in Monterey County. It'll be a competitive process with other counties as well, but it'll also have a component for farm worker housing. There's quite a bit of detail in answering question number 1 on the housing element, and quite a bit of detail on Senate Bill 2 and Senate Bill 3. We've prepared a short-term plan. We're looking for board direction and direction from RMA, County Council, cities of Salinas, and nonprofit home builders on the implementation of what should be in that 2 to 3 year short-term plan to prepare for Senate Bill 2 and Senate Bill 3. So I'll turn this over to Darby Marshall. He's prepared a PowerPoint to aid you in the audience to move through some of the detail of this information. And you can refer to your board packet. We have 8 attachments there to assist you on the technical information.
Good morning, Darby Marshall, Economic Development and Housing. So last week we were asked how we're doing on the RHNA. The RHNA is a state mandate to set aside land that is identified for residential development. The state develops a statewide housing goal. They pass it down to the regional council of governments, who then portions it to the various jurisdictions. Monterey County had a goal of 1,551 units overall. And then it is broken down into very low, moderate, and above moderate. Above moderate would include the county's workforce 1 and workforce 2 income levels. This has always been a goal, but it looks like beginning next year there may be some penalties that are associated with it, especially if we start to allow land that is identified for high density affordable housing to be developed as market rate or commercial. I updated this slide to reflect the presentation on the RHNA last week. As you can see, we are about halfway through producing all of the units that we were obligated, but we are way behind in producing affordable units. Something to think about, we need 337 deed restricted units for low and very low income households. The county's inclusionary housing ordinance only requires 6% of projects, 6% of the units produced by subdivisions and multifamily projects to be very low income affordable. That translates to the need to permit 5,625 units between now and 2023 if we are only going to rely on the inclusionary housing ordinance to meet our RHNA obligations. Last week there were some questions on affordability standards, ADUs, and affordability and emergency and temporary housing and how that meets RHNA. As I mentioned last week, the gold standard for HCD is some kind of a deed restriction or a regulatory agreement between the county or another jurisdiction and the property owner. The county can count ADUs, but it requires us to document that ADU rents are below what the market rate would be. The danger here is HCD has not issued guidance on how to conduct those surveys, so we really want to be cautious in taking that approach until we have further guidance from the state. The other issue with that is we want to keep ADUs flexible enough that property owners will develop them so that we do have the additional units without necessarily creating a burden so that they don't produce the housing. So even if it is something that is used for student housing during the school year and maybe a summer rental, does that meet the goal of providing housing for the students and maybe visitors during the summer? Those are policy issues that will have to be addressed when we get to the ADU discussion. I just want to give the board an understanding of what affordable means in this context. A four-person household in Monterey County can earn up to $40,700 and be very low income. We would set the sale price for that family at $125,635, and the maximum monthly rent would be about $916. The standard that we would use, and we use this in our inclusionary housing program and in our home programs, is 2 people per bedroom plus 1 per unit. So a 4-person household could fit in a 2-bedroom unit. It is probably not what most of us would like, but that is the standard. Put things in perspective, these are the 2017 income limits. In December 2017, Zillow listed the median price for a 2-bedroom home in Monterey County at $498,000. So we will come back to that in a few minutes. Give you some examples of incomes in the county, because we frequently have a conversation about wanting to provide workforce housing, and teachers and firemen and policemen are very frequently mentioned in that group. They are, by comparison, fairly well compensated if they're living alone. The teacher, Carmel Unified, this is the entry level teacher, and the deputy sheriff are already into the workforce 1 category. The public health nurse is the only occupation that has a public employer that would fall into low income. Agricultural workers, cooks, obviously are in that low income. We don't frequently see 1-person households. So you will have a situation where you probably have some kind of house sharing agreement. 2 adults, whether they're just roommates or spouses or siblings. And again, you can probably expect that their roommate or whoever their house share partner is to make an income that is not radically dissimilar to what they make. So you can see how even a 2-person household making, with one of them being a firefighter, is going to already be pushing high workforce 1 and workforce 2 income limits. So when we talk about affordable housing, there are really 2 kinds of housing. There's the permanent housing, which are affordable units where the county or some other external entity sets the income limits and a sale price for a monthly rent. There is supportive housing, which is another form of permanent housing, but it is typically for people with some kind of challenge, be it physical, mental, and then there are employee housing. We have 2 models in this county. One is the Tana Murnau model that everybody's familiar with in Spreckles. That housing is governed by the State Employee Housing Act, and that's an important distinction. Housing under the Employee Housing Act is not income restricted. Okay, so if you were to, say, have an oil company in South County create employee housing for their roughnecks, it doesn't have to be income restricted. The other model that we have tried in this county is the Pebble Beach model. Pebble Beach produced 24 rental units to comply with the county's inclusionary housing ordinance. The county consented to allow them to market those to their employees. We have since found that may be a challenge to that. So we have to explore that more. And we're going to be working with county council on that. There's an issue with fair housing and source of income. So we have to explore that. The other types of housing are emergency shelters. This is typically for a homeless person less than 6 months. And then transitional housing, which is for folks up to 24 months. So as we go through the conversation of affordable housing, one of the things that staff is looking for is guidance on, with the limited resources, we need help in figuring out how do you want us to balance the competing needs for permanent and temporary type housings. A few things to consider. The average cost to develop an affordable unit in Monterey County was $378,000. And that was based on a HUD study, an HCD study of Proposition 1C funded housing projects. And that is higher than the state average. Even housing yesterday told me that, when they go into a jurisdiction, whether it's here or in the Bay Area, they will look for the local government to come up with something in the neighborhood of $100,000 per unit for an affordable development. They can subsidize that depending on how other pieces of financing come together, but at the outset, think in terms of every affordable unit that we want produced by an affordable housing developer, it's going to cost us about $100,000.
Excuse me, Darby. Sorry, Mr. Chair. Just a question. When you say $378,000 to build an affordable unit, is this the 2-bedroom? Are we still talking about the same unit, or
That is the cost to build a unit in a multifamily development. So it's a range of 1 to 5 bedrooms average. And if you're really interested, I can go back to my office and tell you what the average for a 2-bedroom in this county is. But
I just wanted to know what we were, are we talking about, apples to apples, or now are we totally
we've moved
different?
on.
Okay.
Moved on from just that example.
That's helpful. Thank you.
So there are a few key considerations when we talk about developing affordable housing. Property control and then the return on investment. And the return on investment is going to be important for a for-profit or a non-profit housing developer. Affordable housing, by its nature, receives a subsidy from somewhere. Most of us are familiar with the Section 8 vouchers, the Housing Choice Voucher Program that is administered by HUD and locally by the Housing Authority. That's a direct cash payment to make up the difference between what the tenant can afford at 30% of their monthly income and the HUD-determined market rate. The USDA has a similar program that we have about 500 units that receive that in the county as well. Most of the subsidies come in the form of some kind of a development finance, either through tax credit equity, where the investors purchase equity in the development in return for a future credit on their federal taxes, and then things like the federal home program. The county has used inclusionary housing in lieu fees to support affordable housing. We used to use the redevelopment low-income housing trust fund. But the biggest source of subsidies is higher rents charged or sale prices that are charged to the non-income or the market rate units. So if we go back and we remember that slide, and this is going back to the 2-bedroom unit, the $498,000 purchase price for a 2-bedroom unit, the moderate income household income of $272,000. So they have a subsidy gap of about $226,000 that has to be made up somewhere. Okay, and that's a for sale unit. And I just put that out there so you have some perspective of what kind of investment the community or other home buyers or renters are going to have to make for each time we create an affordable unit. Are there questions at this point on the arena or how the county's doing or some of this background information?
I'll get two questions at the end.
Okay. Moving on to the legislative package, SB2 and SB3. Those are the money pieces of legislation. SB2 was billed kind of as a replacement for the Low-Income Housing Trust Fund. Monterey County was receiving about $750,000 a year. We're going to get maybe, if we're lucky, $600,000, $650,000 under SB2. The trust fund accounted for 24% of affordable housing equity statewide up through 2012. We do have some opportunities to possibly increase that if we partner with and the cities are willing to partner with us, but that would be Monterey, Salinas, and Seaside, which are entitlement jurisdictions and would get funding directly through HCD. The other cities in the county would have to compete for it just like they do for CDBG funds. SB3, that's really, they haven't come out with any guidelines on how they're going to distribute those dollars, other than, we've got the buckets of Joe Cerna and multifamily housing.
And just to clarify, SB3 is the affordable housing bond that the voters will have an opportunity to vote on in November.
Yes.
So it's a potential new funding source, but still needs voter approval, but it's an important new funding source for local governments.
Yes. The other thing about SB2 money, the first year it's 50% for homeless services, 50% affordable housing, with an emphasis on the planning. Okay? Those dollars will probably not be available to the county until spring or summer of next year at the earliest. So if we want to get projects shovel ready, the county will probably have to find a way to finance county staff to make projects shovel ready and more competitive. SB 166 is a no-let law, so if we have in our housing element, we've identified 31 opportunity sites that are going to produce have the potential to produce a certain number of affordable units. If we allow those lots to develop and not produce at that expected level of affordability, we have to identify additional properties and zone them to make up that difference. AB 1397 is restricting and making it tighter for all jurisdictions to make sure that we're not just identifying and zoning property as potentially good for affordable housing, but that has a realistic opportunity to develop as affordable housing. And SB 1505 just basically allows counties the latitude to have inclusionary housing ordinances. There are some caveats to that that the board may want to take advantage of. One of them is right now our inclusionary ordinance has a 6% very low and 6% low income requirement. SB 1505 allows us to go up to 15% for those two categories before we have to start doing economic impact analysis and market justification for higher rates. So that's something that we may want, that the board may want to consider. And then SB 35 is basically a streamlining bill. We have had at least one property owner in the county contact our office to find out if it would work. It is clearly written for more urban areas, such as the city of Salinas or the city of Monterey, but there may be opportunities within the unincorporated area for us to take advantage of it. Inclusionary housing, so I have this. Inclusionary housing has accounted for about 20% of the units produced, of the affordable units produced countywide. About 11% of them are the direct result of the county's inclusionary housing ordinance. As I mentioned, it requires currently 6% very low, 6% low, 8% of the units to be moderate, 5% to be workforce 1. With developers at that point getting to choose between producing the next whole unit or paying an in-lieu fee. Because of the way that the ordinance works, we even though we have that 6% requirement, because that frequently results in a fractional unit, we round that up, so we'll get like 5.5 very low units, and then that partial units goes to the low and on up the food chain. So it does short us a little bit, the way our current ordinance is structured. And again, 5,625 permits is what's going to be required, assuming all of those permits trigger the inclusionary ordinance, and they're not small subdivisions. So who's building affordable housing here? Surprisingly, the biggest developers are for-profit, or some kind of a mix of for-profit, non-profit, as a result of tax credits. They have accounted for over 41% of the affordable housing built in this county since 1987. 33% were built by nonprofits such as Eden Housing, Chispa, and I throw AbHow in there just because they have a large project that benefited immensely from our inclusionary housing ordinance in Carmel Valley. And then the Housing Authority and their development on the Housing Development Corporation. So clearly there is money to be made in affordable housing. It's how you structure the projects. Developers are looking for certainty. They want to know that they're not going to be land banking for a long time. They want to quickly turn it over. They need to be located near services so that they can be competitive for things like USDA or tax credit subsidies. And for the nonprofit sector, you're typically looking at a 3-year cycle to get all your financing in place. So these nonprofits are carrying land or options for a long period of time that increases their cost. And in order to be competitive for the subsidies, you have to already have your land entitled. So they also have a large amount of money in sunk costs for environmental impact studies, for permit studies to get to that point. So it's an expensive process, and the for-profit developers typically want something that's going to go quick. So they will look in cities. So if you look at where the for-profits are building, they're very active in Greenfield, King City, the city of Salinas. This is just to show you where the affordable housing is being built. You can see that the city of Salinas has the lion's share. Then when we look at the county planning areas, again, the Carmel Valley master plan area is kind of skewed because we have the 79-unit Rippling River complex, and then Pacific Meadows, which was a 200-unit complex that was built on land donation triggered by the inclusionary housing ordinance. So it kind of skews things there. And then we also, as part of the Las Palmas project, and these units aren't reflected, the Las Palmas developer built 80 units of affordable housing, rental housing, inside the city of Salinas. 40 of those are still in the inventory and managed by Chispa. Financing for affordable housing, tax credits are certainly since 1987, we've had about $1.2 billion invested in income-restricted housing in Monterey County. And that's to build and rehabilitate it. There's been a huge market in the last few years for rehabilitation. Developers have used, I've identified at least 49 different sources of funding. 84% of the funding is at the discretion of the federal government, either through tax policy and the low-income housing tax credits, or funding for USDA rural development, or the Section 8 program. Another big source was bond programs, such as the 2006 Proposition 1C, which provided about $1.9 million statewide for affordable housing. And then we have the $4 billion bond that's on the November ballot. The challenge with those two funding sources is their bonds. They're one-time money. They don't create a permanent, ongoing source of financing. Review housing, affordable housing potential in the general plan and housing element. Real quick, you'll notice that we have rural centers, community plan areas, the affordable housing overlays, and then just the North County coastal. The affordable housing overlays were included in the general plan. They allow owners of properties within those overlay districts to either develop consistent with the underlying land use or develop it at an average density of 10 units per acre with 100% affordability. Higher density units. Community plan areas, this would be like Castroville, have higher densities allowed, and typically the development is by right. These areas also have existing infrastructure in place, or we have already identified and figured out how to finance the expansion of that infrastructure as a result of higher density residential development. Next, you have rural centers. These are Bradley, San Lucas. They have the potential to be higher density residential, but we do not have infrastructure in place or plans for how to build and finance that infrastructure. So we want to think long and hard about putting affordable housing in those areas. The other challenge with them is they are typically not located next to services that everyday consumers need. So they are not competitive for tax credits or USDA funding in most cases. And then you have just the North County coastal area, which is not within a community plan or a rural center or an affordable housing overlay district. And that's the vast majority of the county. The general plan and the housing element identified over 31 opportunity sites countywide. And this table summarizes the development potential of if those are developed at the anticipated densities. The challenge here is we don't control any of these properties. We don't own them, we don't have options, that being the county or affordable housing developers. There are approximately 47 parcels in the 21 opportunity areas and at least 20 property owners. So there is a challenge associated with, even if we could, many of these are going to require somebody with some deep pockets to go out and do some assembling of parcels so you have something that is of sufficient size to be market financing. They don't have financing, and some of these, particularly in the Pine County, San Ardo, and San Lucas areas, have already been subdivided and don't necessarily have inclusionary restrictions in place. So it would be, how do we get back into those? Or they satisfied their inclusionary obligations many years ago. Back in December, RMA ran a list of all parcels in Monterey County that have high-density residential in their zoning. They identified 300 parcels with more than 875 acres, but the average parcel is only 2.9 acres in size. So it's really too small for most affordable housing projects. And then, a lot of them are remainder parcels. So the Morro Coho subdivision, for example, has 17 remainder parcels that are like community parks or roads or things of that nature. So there's a lot of stuff out there that's not really developable that has that zoning. I'm going to jump to the Mid-Carmel Valley Affordable Housing Overlay District. I'm really going to focus on the parcel to the two big pieces to the left of this slide. This property is set aside as low-density residential, 1 unit, 5 units to the acre. The challenge here with this one is its location. It doesn't have water and sewer. Those can both be challenges. On the other hand, it does have a supermarket and pharmacy, which scores well with TCAT. But again, the location right off Carmel Valley Road could be a challenge. And then just to give you an idea, this could support 145 units at 10 units to the acre with the 35% unit density bonus. Monterey Peninsula Airport District, this overlay is right there off Homestead. It's, if you're familiar with the area, the Oak Tree Views housing development is just to the south of the parcel that is labeled east. This could support up to 890 units. It's a nice, big, contiguous parcel. There's only two, and I think they're both in the same ownership. So there is some potential. We've internally thought that, this might be a good opportunity for the county to partner with the city of Monterey and CHOMP to meet not only affordable housing requirements, but some employee housing requirements for CHOMP, and maybe have them help carry some of the cost of development. The 2010 general plan, however, has an underlying land use designation of resource conservation. So even if, as I said, the developer gets to choose which standard to apply, either the affordable housing overlay or the underlying land use designation. In this case, I suspect there would be a lot of feedback from the community. So that would be something that we need to look at. There's another toll acres on the other side of the road.
Feedback is a nice way to say it.
12 acres on the west side of Homestead that could also be developed, but the balance of the affordable housing overlay district is already pretty developed with ranchette type units. Highway 68 Reservation Road, we've all seen this as we drive out of Salinas on 68. This is all prime farmland. So again, it's almost 3 miles to the Knob Hill and the pharmacy. It's not a good location for tax credit or the subsidy programs. And there's limited MST access. It only goes between Monterey and Salinas from this location. So that would be a challenging location unless the property owner had the capacity to finance it themselves. Castroville, so down in the lower center of the map on the left is the Cypress Residential. That is Opportunity Site 10 in the housing element. It is all in ag production right now. It's partially, most of the parcels in it are either in the floodplain or the flood zone, and it's also farmland of statewide importance. So it's got its challenges. The other opportunity sites within Castroville are all fairly small, and they will probably develop as market demands, and we address some other issues in Castroville that we'll get to in a minute. Central Salinas Valley, we have a few out in Chuar. Again, we have some infrastructure constraints. They're not ideally located to compete for public subsidies, tax credits, USDA, and like Bradley, San Ardo, and there's another map that I looked out for San Lucas. But what we wanted to focus on was the pipeline for affordable housing. What properties have either gotten their entitlements but not been started construction, submitted applications to RMA, or have contacted us and asked about the possibility of developing either mixed affordable market rate or all affordable housing. I do want to make a disclaimer on the property lists, because we have details on all of the opportunity sites and the affordable housing overlays and parcels in attachments 3 and 7. The county-owned parcels still need to be vetted to make sure that they are truly surplus to the county's needs, and RMA would need to do that. So they're in here, but they need to undergo further vetting. So there are some projects that we've identified in the housing element that are indefinitely delayed. Sometimes the delays are voluntary, sometimes they're not. So Chispa has property at the intersection of Highway 153 and Castroville Boulevard. They have proposed building 214 units. 124 of them would be affordable to up to the moderate income, they'd be rental. And then they have a 90-unit for-sale project, and I believe, and Alfred's here in the audience, that they're targeting to be affordable up to workforce. Challenge is it's in the coastal zone, water. Again, you have some distance issues because it's not in Castroville, so you have some challenges with being eligible for the 9% tax credit. Chispa is also slated to be the developer of the second phase multifamily affordable housing at East Garrison. 65 units, but they're facing a $6 to $8 million financing gap that needs to be filled before they can build those additional units. We have a 19-unit project in Castroville that is farm labor housing. It's called Thistle Manor. The developer has all of the entitlements he needs. The developer has put the project on indefinite hold because they're being assessed $20,000 a unit in traffic impact fees. Okay, it's a holdover from the Castroville Community Plan. So one of the things that staff will come to is a recommendation that we can conduct a nexus study on the impact fees in Castroville and possibly looking at can we reduce or eliminate these fees so that these projects can go forward. And then there are some projects that probably don't make sense where they're located. San Lucia Preserve, which is outside Carmel Valley. It's on the south side of Carmel Valley. They owe us 41 units of inclusionary housing. They originally wanted to do workforce housing for firemen and teachers and police officers and deputy sheriffs, and then they found that they couldn't income qualify them. But the location, again, may not make sense for low and moderate income households that need to be closer to services or closer to where they work. So we want to possibly re-explore that one. This is a parcel, we're all, I think, familiar with the Valverde project in Carmel Valley. A property owner has recently come forward about 3 months ago and asked if his property, which fronts on Carmel Valley Road and Valverde, will qualify for SB 35 streamlining. It does almost. In terms of urban proximity, it passes that test. It's the only hazard to it is, if you look, you can see there is a piece of it that I have shaded a little darker green. That is prime farmland, and under SB 35, that disqualifies it. He currently has 2 parcels totaling 8.72 acres. With the current land use designation in place, he could develop up to 43.62, 44 units. And then if he were to commit to providing 11% of those units as very low affordability, he could go up to almost 59 units with the current density. This project, because it's less than a mile from the Safeway, it's less than a mile from the CVS, and shopping and retail, would score probably fairly well for tax credits and other public financing if we could get it up over about 60 units. Okay, so there are some stretches that need to be made. This property owner has also come forward and said he would be willing to develop up to 120 units on the site and take on the inclusionary obligations of a number of the projects throughout Carmel Valley. That's far beyond what I'm qualified to speak on. But it makes sense that having some concentration of the affordable housing in one area as an option.
Could I just ask a quick question on that one? Could he go up?
Yeah, that would all be
And that
something.
would be able to get up to the 60.
Yeah, we would have to, I'm sure RMA and planning would have to weigh in and work with him on it, but, yeah, he probably could. I don't know exactly how. The staff has also identified a couple.
I might get shot just for asking that question.
But we would prefer to go inward and upward on each and every infill project. The challenges with the height restriction, no longer is there an airport in the area, so we're reduced there. So it's the surrounding areas and the surrounding residents that might protest looking at what could be a high-density project. But to make projects more village and walkable, we're looking at higher densities, and that means a little taller projects. Elevators, ADA, Americans with Disability, and also fire protection. So fire trucks with ladders that can reach those heights become some of our challenges.
We've also started to look at what sites might, in some way, help pay for their affordable housing development. The UCAMS Triangle at the corner of Reservation and Blanco is one such site. We believe it can support up to 500 residential units. And the first step would be to carve out, 10 or 15 acres at the corner of Reservation and Blanco and put a gas station or something that would start to generate some revenue that could pay for staff to get the rest of the parcel entitled, master plan, and then issue an RFP to a developer. And then it would also include some kind of it would be a mixed-use development with commercial, industrial uses.
What's the land zone there, Doug? What's the zoning?
Right now, the general plan and the Fort Ord reuse plan have it as mixed use, and UC Santa Cruz is the owner, but they haven't done a whole lot out with it, so. We've also looked at the corner of Natividad and Laurel, which is the old county printing center. We think this parcel could be subdivided into 3 pads and generate about $450,000 a year in lease income that could be used to entitle and work with nonprofit or for-profit developers to entitle property that they may own and get it developed as affordable housing. The other thing that Stalin could potentially do is be bonded and spin off some money that could be used for an emergency shelter or temporary housing.
Yeah, this is our shelter site. There's an opportunity to be able to move this project forward and help fund another site. Now we got a new revenue source that we didn't have before.
So that's correct. So one option would be, how can we generate revenue on this that could be used for your homeless shelter at another location that could either be temporary or more permanent? I've been working with Carl Holm and RMA to look at what could be more permanent, and we understand that the board is working with the city of Salinas to do the same.
Right.
So a few policy considerations for you. Affordability versus location. It's certainly more cost effective to have higher density affordable housing as opposed to trying to spread it out. The inclusionary ordinance is kind of a more dispersed model, and it tends to favor the higher incomes in the low income and moderate income spectrum. Whereas the more concentrated you go, the more the need for subsidies is there. So the funding that we can put into a project to help make it work. Financing for affordable and emergency housing is largely at the whim of the federal government and state voters at this point. There is a lot of competition for limited federal and state financing resources for these types of housing projects. So there may be some opportunities for us to partner with the cities, again, to prioritize 1 or 2 projects a year that we would put forward from the county to tax credits, so that we're not competing between a project in the unincorporated area and a project in the city of Salinas and diluting our impact. And then the need for us to get projects to be shovel-ready. And as I mentioned, we're probably going to be looking at, if we really want to make affordable housing a reality within the next 2 to 3 years, there's probably going to need to be some county financial commitment to that. Other things, maybe, again, taking a countywide approach to solving affordable housing, pooling of SB2 resources, prioritizing projects for TCAC. There's giving you a laundry list of possibilities in attachment A. With that,
So we have a short-term plan that's really just an outline that was part of the board referral. We're actually looking for direction from the Board of Supervisors to build that short-term plan. We're looking for input from RMA and other various departments and city partners and nonprofit partners. What we pulled out is what needs to be done as the most obvious and urgent items. Year one would be to identify those parcels. We've identified those parcels. We've shared that with you today, and we've identified some of the roadblocks.
And this is attachment 7 to your report.
I'm sorry. Yes,
This is like
Chair.
a follow along.
Attachment 7, 3-year plan for affordable housing. We would complete the Nexus study. We've hired a consultant to update our inclusionary ordinance. Our housing element and general plan are congruent and compliant with the state. We have passed all federal and state housing audits, so we're in good shape there. We're working with transportation. We're working with funding fees. So year one, we're well underway already. Year two would be to receive some of those funds so we could do site preparation, any additional planning and analysis. And then year three would be prepared to apply for those funds and attach those funds to all pre-approved projects, or the RFPs have been issued for pre-approved projects, and start going vertical or start construction on those projects. And that would be the match of various funding streams. And we would also look for the possibility of adding an MOU in here to work with other cities and other partners so we could marry their funds along with our funds. We might not meet the regional housing numbers by doing that because the higher gain could be in a city versus in the county. I'm not as concerned about meeting those numbers as I am concerned about yielding more units for homeless, very low, moderate, and even workforce. So today we're looking for direction so we can complete this short-term plan for you.
Thank you. And before we open it up to our colleagues for comments and questions, I did just want to preface our own board discussion that I think this conversation about housing is long overdue. And I think this is important. And I want to really thank Darby for all the work he did putting this presentation. He gave us a snapshot of where we're at and where kind of we need to go also. And some of the recommendations are a little bit more, some are a little bit more challenging than others, but there's some low-hanging fruit. And certainly this issue is such a crisis in California that I'm glad we're having this conversation. I'm glad that there's some housing proponents here because all the residents in Monterey County know we need to do a lot better. The numbers, they say, just to meet current housing needs, about 3 million units in the state of California. And this issue of homelessness and housing is not going to go away until each of our counties, each of our local governments, put a major emphasis on trying to do better than what we've been doing so far. So with that, I'm just going to open it up for questions or comments. Start with Supervisor Phillips.
Yeah, I had some clue that. I don't understand the Santa Lucia Preserve. You say there's 40 units that's set aside, but we haven't done anything with them.
So under the inclusionary ordinance, they owe the community 40 units, and they attempted to qualify volunteer firemen and others. They've not built those 40 units yet, and the homeowner association is willing to work with us to pay an in lieu fee and transfer that. We've discussed this with RMA about the possibility of transferring from one planning area to another planning area, and it seems possible. We're updating our inclusionary ordinance so it would make it legal and easier for them to not build the units, but pay just an in lieu fee. Today, our inclusionary ordinance is designed, you build the units on site. If you have half a unit, what we call a fractional, that you can't build because of land use, then you pay that in lieu fee just on the fractional unit.
And the Casserole Community Plan, I know that's been an obstacle, and and we're asking these people to pay, when we looked about what they were gonna have to pay there compared to what they paid to build affordable housing in the Veranda area. How big a thing is it to get that Castroville community plan changed to eliminate Artichoke Avenue and the 156 construction that's already paid through Measure X?
So that's a good question. We haven't analyzed that yet. RMA can answer that. It comes out of their planning unit and it comes out of advanced planning. And they have several community plans that could use an update or some tweaking. I don't know if that can be handled in-house or it requires consulting out. You may address that to Carl.
Well, while he's coming up, then the Invest property, we've been looking at that for some time. They haven't done anything with it. Is that a viable
That's
property?
correct. It looks and appears as though it's just been in land bank. They've been working on what they call their North Central campus, but that has a research and development overlay on it, so nobody's built on it. And they have water for that. They've not allocated any water for the Invest Triangle. So I approached them about a land lease, 90 years, $1 a year for affordable housing, multifamily, 500 units. And they've been positive and receptive in listening to me about that.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Carl with the RMA. If I understand the supervisor's question, it was really more directed at the impact fees, because I believe that's what is kind of the obstacle for Castroville, versus the community plan, which is actually a vehicle to encourage development. The impact fees are such that they've become the obstacle. To amend that program, that's the Nexus study that Mr. Sparrow was speaking about. That typically takes a couple of years, because first it's looking at what the infrastructure that is needed for the plan and what the fair share is of that, and then going through the hearing process on that.
Okay, thank you. I'm just curious, where are we in housing statewide? How do we compare in affordable housing with other counties? Anybody know?
Poorly.
No?
Out of 58 counties, we're in the bottom 10. And we have good company with Santa Cruz County and San Luis Obispo County. So the coastal counties do struggle a little bit more. On the community plan for Castroville and on the impact fees, I think we can use some of the pre-grant funds that are allowed for technical assistance in planning. So we would put that into year 1, year 2 of this work plan if you direct us to, and identify those funds to make that upgrade and correction. Also, you had mentioned some of the restrictions on being in the coastal plan in Castroville and looking at can that coastal commission planning line be moved or adjusted at all to better serve the residents of Castroville.
Okay. We'll jump over here. Supervisor Parson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the presentation. This is such an important topic. So I feel like there's a lot here, and it needs a lot more scrutiny and, prioritization and so on. I think this is a good start. But was there any discussion of possibly setting up either an ad hoc or other committee of this board to help staff sort through this? And one of the reasons I'm asking this question is because we are facing a rather stark budget discussion in a week or two, and part of this report is proposing some, it looks like, new staff or reallocation of existing staff. And so I think trying to be as realistic as possible about what can be done in the short term to get to either local, be ready to spend well, local funds or state funds. What can we do with existing staff, and can a board committee help with some of this discussion and prioritization?
Good question, Supervisor Parker, and very astute. There is a lot of work that needs to be done here that's pre-planning. We could use an additional housing technician. full-time person and 50% of an RMA planner and 25% of county council. This would help us on the community plans, the preparation of the grants, and being legal so we can build more units. When we look at the ad hoc committee that was formed to look at farm worker housing, I think that's a high priority. So after they're done looking at the farm worker housing solutions, they may want to move forward on other affordable housing. We do have a housing advisory committee. Wayne is here from that committee. They've not been tasked to look at the prioritization of projects, but we could certainly task that committee to look at the prioritization of these projects and bring a recommendation back to the Board of Supervisors.
And I guess I would just ask, I don't know if you can answer this now, but I mean, there are a number of things that are on the list of things to be done in year one that are underway. I guess I would say, what is the list of things that you can do with existing staff? Not looking at expanding staff. I'd love to be able to add county jobs to get this work done, but I don't think that we're in the budget environment for that. So I think we need to be pretty realistic about what resources we have available. And so I'd be interested in and I have some ideas, but I'd like to know what your thoughts are about what can be done with existing staff. And I guess I would say existing staff based on what's proposed in the budget. Because there may be, I'm not sure where all the cuts are. I haven't read through the entire thing yet, but anyway, I think it may be an issue for this arena as well as others.
Okay, so if we were to start with the staffing, it looks like the economic development staff would be cut out of this year's proposed budget. So we would not be able to work on the housing and do some of the housing grants. That would leave us with 3.5 FTEs in housing. They're stretched now to complete the work that's underway, so hence we're using the consultant to do the inclusionary ordinance upgrade. When the grant funds become available in about a year from now, those funds can be used to supplement consultants and relieve some of the staff time, so we could get more of this work done. If we could go ahead on some of the retail development on county-owned lands, that can generate a revenue source for us, and that can be used as well for existing staff to get the existing work done. RMA, we work with 5 staff in the RMA departments now of Public Works, current planning, advanced planning, and special projects. They have not a lot of capacity to offer much more work to us. So when it's time to work on preparing the grants and the land use, I think we can scrape together the staff and eke out the time to apply for these funds. Our goal with this plan is to be eligible for SB2 funds and to be eligible for SB3 funds. With the existing staff, we can do that. If we receive a staff cut, I think it would be quite challenging to achieve that.
I would just, yeah, I think we need to be realistic, and I would point out, though, in terms of writing grants, we do have a consultant firm that is very adept at identifying sources of money and helping to write those grants. So it's one reason I think that maybe a subcommittee focusing on this would be helpful, because I think there may be opportunities, but we have to think with our best creative minds and with the bigger picture to really figure out what's doable and how do we position ourselves well in an environment where we are very resource constrained.
Thank you. Will Simone, and then to Mary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that overview, and I think very, very timely right now because of the potential funding that's coming down the pipeline. One of the things that I think is important is to get some of this parcels that can give us a good number of units, get them ready because they're shovel ready, and then the grantors also get the sense that there's a political climate here that is supportive of this. I think that'll suit the county well to be able to draw down some of those potential funding. One of the questions I had is, I know Supervisor Alejo, I had made a referral on the Laurel site, next to the public workshop. Was that listed here or not?
We didn't include it specifically in here, but we have had those discussions with RMA and facilities on that. So the Laurel Yard site, 855 Laurel Yard, right now we're looking at what could be temporary shelter. If we look at Natividad and Laurel, the corner with the old print shop, if we could put retail on that, generate the lease rates on there, sales tax sharing agreement with the city of Salinas, we can generate 500 to 700,000 a year. Have that fund a homeless shelter temporarily, and then develop a permanent solution for a homeless shelter with the city of Salinas, and relocate from 855 Laurel Yard to that permanent facility using those funds, and then return 855 Laurel Yard to facilities as a public works project.
And then the other comment on the Santa Lucia subdivision, I think it merits looking at that to be able to, they can generate enough in-lieu fees to be able to make one of the other projects in Carmel Valley to have that, I think would suit our needs to develop more workforce housing nearer to the jobs and where the.
I think there's 2 to 3 projects, Supervisor Salinas and Carmel Valley, that can yield the units that we would like to yield. We just have to work through some of those challenging lawsuits and traffic issues and impact issues. But I think in the next year, they may be resolved.
Supervisor Adams.
Thanks very much for the report. It was really well done and very comprehensive. It's something that, I've been asking for a long time, so I very much appreciate receiving it. Had a couple of questions and a couple of comments following up on Supervisor Parker's comment. I know that we do have the Housing Advisory Commission, but I know that the meetings have been canceled somewhat frequently. And I'm just thinking with the board's current interest and commitment to addressing the affordable housing crisis, we should really make sure that the commission is ratcheted up and sort of re-energized. And I'm just wondering if perhaps we should consider appointing a member of the Board of Supervisors to that commission so that we could guide a really focused and strategic effort toward accomplishing some of the things that we've talked about today. And secondly, I was wondering, following up on Supervisor Salinas' comment, can you just tell me, in just a ballpark figure, I have no idea what the in lieu fee would be for Santa Lucia Conservancy on the 41 units?
So let me disclose a little bit of an issue. The inclusionary housing ordinance was last updated in 2003. We have to use the fee calculated from 2003. Currently, we think the new updated housing ordinance, the fee might be closer to $300,000 per unit. So today, for Santa Lucia Preserve, it may be 75 to 100.
It's probably in the 20.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you answer that.
So the old fee structure was last updated in 2001, and it's kind of clunky. I believe that the Greater Monterey Peninsula in lieu fee is in the neighborhood of $200,000 a unit, if not higher. So that could generate up to, a little over $8 million, $8.2 million for the 41 units. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but it varies depending on planning area. So if you're in South County, it may be $30,000. If you're on the peninsula, it may be $200,000.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. And then continuing on, just in addition to looking at other things that we need to do to ensure that we have the capability of being shovel-ready, I think we may not spend enough time examining the barriers to building low-income housing or market force housing. I think we ought to take a look at that. And then finally, perhaps I misunderstood something that you said, but I want to pursue it. I want to make sure that it's important that we clarify right now that affordable summer housing for visitors, that is not included in the county's goals for the development of affordable housing.
No, thank you for pointing that out. What I wanted to highlight is the importance that we not place such restrictions on the development of ADUs that it would preclude a household from the property owner from having a flexible use of that. The goal is we would like to have that unit produced because it will potentially alleviate housing stress. If you have mom and dad move into it, it's one thing. or your children move out, and you have the unit, what do you do with it? You need to create an ADU that's got some flexibility, that it meets the homeowner's needs, because it's not an insignificant investment on their part. So there's a good deal of work that needs to go into structuring what would be, how we would do something that would allow us to count the ADU as affordable housing. And we would need to consider it very carefully.
I appreciate your being really careful with this, because I think, boom, it's like that, and suddenly there's another short-term rental in the neighborhood. And the fact that there's so much additional income that could be brought in, and completely missing the point of what it is that we're attempting to do is serious. I know that even as we stand now, the enforcement of what we have already in the housing portfolio of short-term rentals is virtually impossible to enforce and monitor. To add another element, I think would, really be just totally defeating the entire purpose that we have here. Just comments.
If I may, Supervisor, for an accessory dwelling unit or an ADU unit to be an affordable unit, it would need some type of deed restriction. We don't have the authority to add that deed restriction right now, so we're looking at what incentives can we build for Monterey County for accessory dwelling units, and then trade that incentive with the home builder to deed restrict that. So it may not be used for a short-term rental, but be used for its intended use, which could be elder granny flat, or could be farm worker or workforce, or affordable, very low, moderate. So we would be looking for an incentive where we could attach a deed restriction to it.
It would be kind of interesting, conversely, if we were able to take some of the short-term rentals that we have now and look at putting deed restrictions and, terrific incentives to those homeowners to be able to convert those to affordable units.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just one quick question, I think there are here from the public, people who want to speak. But I did have a question about the Laurel and Natividad. I mean, I know this is just an idea, but I'm curious why we're only talking about retail when we know that this is a prime site for mixed use, or, something that could have a much bigger community benefit, not just revenue to the county.
Right, very good point, Supervisor Parker. Staff has brought this to my attention, that this print shop is antiquated, the parcel could be reused. Why don't we look at generating the highest amount of revenue, pull the revenue off of that, and apply the revenue to our highest priorities for the Board of Supervisors. That was a good idea when we discussed it with the Assistant County Administrative Officer, and he said, why don't you go ahead and pursue that and see what kind of revenue you can generate on that. So we did, and when we look at that, there is 3 pads that you could create on that. Each would have a rental rate or a lease rate based on that pad. Then if you target the type of retailer that would go on there, you receive the sales tax from that as well, another secondary income source. So to maximize the income source, so we could draw that and use it somewhere else, it lends itself to retail, not for, say, housing or for office or a credit union, savings and loan, or a bank, but actual retail, so we can have a ground lease and we can have and capture the sales tax from it.
Right, I get that, but if we're going to trade putting in a permanent shelter and, some really interesting things that the community definitely needs, why not put housing on top of retail? The city of Monterey is doing that all the time. It's really appropriate for an urban setting like that. I think it would just be a really sad, wasted opportunity to not find a way to have some sort of housing be part of it. It's just, just a comment. We don't have to work it out here today.
Absolutely, and it's a
Any project
great
will come
comment.
back to the board in a future date, so we're able to flesh that out with any developer who's contemplating moving forward on that site.
Right, and we would do that on that corner. However, the traffic impacts are a little bit higher if we do that, so it's not ideally suited for the residential. But we have other parcels and other ideas in Salinas and outside of Salinas where that could work very, very well.
Okay, before we open further comment, I just wanted to let people know that this was, one of the main drivers is we're trying to tee up this discussion and projects to utilize the SB2 money and the potential money that might be available next year if the affordable housing bond passes. I did want to let the public know that the League of Cities put out a good little brochure, the 2018 Guide to New Housing. It covers, makes it really easy to read all the 15 bills that we just mentioned in brief. But the housing bond is important because SB2, we're going to get a certain percentage, but the housing bond creates these new pots of money. Many of our are going to be competitive, so those communities that are teeing up projects are going to be able to draw down the most resources. They have shovel-ready projects ready. But $4 billion, out of the $4 billion, multi-family housing would be $1.5 billion. Transit-oriented development implementation program would get $150 million. Infill incentive grant programs, so these are the small properties that you were just talking about, the 2 to 3 acres. There's going to be another $300 million available for those infill types of projects. On farm worker housing, the Joe Cerner Farm Worker Housing Fund has been zero funded for, I don't know, a lot of years now, but they would get $300 million from the bond. The local housing trust fund matching grant program, we just participated in a housing trust program here. We created one here in the Monterey Bay. That would be another $300 million. Town home, $300 million. Self-help housing, this is where residents put in a little bit of their sweat equity and labor into their houses, that's $150 million. And then the CalVet program, the $1 billion for veterans housing, unfortunately, it's going to be limited to home loan programs versus other types of affordable housing projects. But it's good for residents to be able to have an easy way to understand the complexities of those bills and the housing bond. The only questions I have is on the ADUs to be counted. Maybe that's also a bill idea that we could push next year, that if we're going to build housing, if we're not able to count it in our arena housing numbers, maybe that's a legislative idea that we could push so that we can count those units. And maybe they won't all be counted towards very low and low, but at least that they can count in our overall numbers. If it's not eligible now, it seems that that's an easy legislative fix for our next legislative session. Other question I had was, how did the Tanimura Nantil or next Casa Veranda, how did those units get counted towards our arena numbers? And would they, I don't think those were counted in your numbers.
So, Tanimura and Anil wasn't counted. I'm not sure, that's one of the things that came up is I have to figure out why those units were not reported to HUD. But essentially, what you get is HUD would count, or HCD would count every front door, so you would get potentially 100 units. But again, I think the issue is because they're employee housing and they don't have a regulatory requirement that limits the income or the rent year-round, that it becomes a challenge. It's just it's the way that it was developed of the Employee Housing Act as opposed to being regular, subject to the inclusionary housing requirements that would have placed a deed restriction on it.
But considering the many projects and the work that the ad hoc farm worker housing task force is going to be doing, that seems like another legislative idea that we should be pushing, because then it would then incentivize those counties that are going to focus on employee housing. If we get it counted towards our arena numbers, then there's more of an incentive for us to do that. And considering the work that's ahead of us and projects that are, where there's a lot of interest to do so, it would be in our interest to get this legislature to make that tweak in statute and have us have the benefit of counting those towards our overall goals. Let's see here. The other things that were not listed and on your recommendations were, I know MBEP came here and did a presentation of a series of recommendations, many of those not listed on attachment 7, but when we do this back after public comment, certainly want to make sure we're looking at those and including those in our overall strategy, making sure that the farm worker employer housing ad hoc work is going to be part of our strategy. Our 80 units is going to be coming to us in this coming summer to see how we could greater incentivize pushing more ADUs for our overall housing stock in Monterey County. And then certainly the MBES property that UC Santa Cruz owns, there seems to be a lot of potential there, and also looking at whether we should be trying to use new economic development tools or formal redevelopment tools the Community Revitalization and Investment Authority under AB2 might be another way to use tax increment financing and keeping those property taxes here to carry out some of those projects that seem really, seeming to have a lot of potential at this point in time.
All of these are good ideas. Would you like us to add this into the short-term plan?
Well, we'll come back.
Okay.
When we consider a motion to include that in the direction. I just wanted to raise them early on. But let's open it up for public comment. I got 5 speaker cards so far. I got Jane Bart, Alfred Diaz-Infante, Luis Preciado, Matt Huerta, and Jessica Rivas. And then before they come up here and begin, let's just talk. We have 2 other remaining items. Items number 9 and 9.1, which is already going to already postponed till June 5th because it's already 12:25 actually. Could we consider pushing off number 9 and 9.1, table that to a future meeting date? What's the will of my colleagues?
Or this afternoon, I mean, or come back, I mean, depending, I know it's gonna be a long afternoon already, but if we came back, if we tried to break in time to get something quick for lunch, come back at 1 or 1:15, and, I don't know, is there,
You're the one who usually wants their
I know, I'm ready for lunch, that's what I'm saying, break for lunch.
Do we have any time constraints on?
We have 1, 2, 3.
I guess the question is time constraints on the Oak Woodland conservation policies. I mean, this has been forever in the making, so, but do we have any strict timelines for when our feedback needs to be received?
Our CEO, you want to answer that?
I believe there isn't, but I'll let Melanie answer that directly.
Thank you, Chair, Supervisors. For the Oak Woodland Conservation item, there's no contractual limitations. However, the work in order to advance and complete the policies that are covered by the base reuse plan prior to forest sunset, who is currently contracting, there are time constraints to continue moving it forward. I don't know whether or not a delay to a future date would significantly impact that, but it does delay the consultant work.
So if we, maybe the clerk can tell us if we have an opening on an upcoming agenda quite soon in the month of June, where we could contemplate it, the 12th, or?
We'll find a date in June. To move things along, I'll move that we postpone item 9 and 9.1. 9.1 I think was already recommended to agendize that for June 5th. But 9.1, we'll find a date in June. We'll make it work, Supervisor Parker. So, is there a second? Further discussion? See, public comment on this motion? Well, we'll find a date in June.
Date certain.
Yeah, June. June 26th, date certain. Yeah. If we can find an earlier date, we'll try to find an earlier date. But for now, at least no later than June 26th. Okay, there's been a motion second. See no further discussion. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, those motions, those items will be agendized to those future meetings. Okay, back on this item. Public comment. Sorry, Ms. Barr, you're up first.
No problem. Thank you very much. Jane Barr with Eden Hilton. I'm reminded of the quote, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. We've come out of a period of economic slump where there was basically no housing produced between 2008 and 2016. And that has hurt, you've got a supply-demand factor. If we didn't have supply, we've got huge demand for apartments and houses, and the rents are astronomical. We're not going to be able to make up for that in a short period of time, but we do need to have to keep up with our progress towards our arena goals in the next period of time. Although it was stated that we've met 50% of our arena goals, we have not met 50% of our arena goals that chart showed that there were over 100% of the above mod, which is market housing, the very low and lower, each less than 10%, so they'll be misled by that. The housing element, the state now will enforce not just a plan, but on meeting your goals, but you need to enforce and adopt the consequences in regard to streamlining projects without your ability to say anything. You also lost the funds to the county, which is very important. Can't even read my own writing today. So this is a new time of partnerships are needed to provide affordable housing for the community and to meet the state demands in order to save funding. What the county can do, you can work with affordable housing developers and market rate developers to develop housing. You can develop and provide incentives, assist with entitlements, prioritize them, perhaps consider assigning one planner just to work with affordable housing developers so they know the business and how it works. Revision of fees, there are a number of ways. Specifically, the number one I would say is charge fees on a square foot, not a unit basis. So a 6,000 square foot house doesn't have the same fees as a 600 square foot apartment. You can also delay payments until the certificate of occupancy, or even have them be paid on an individual receipts basis. And there's a possibility of waiving the fees as well. I don't think the county needs to apply for funding. That's what the affordable housing developers are here for, and you're also in Urban County, and most of your funding is coming through that. So for the most part, you don't. I don't see that you need to do that. Really, the county has to assist with delivering the sites. The MS Triangle is a perfect site. The 40 units out in the middle of nowhere. In lieu fees could be used for shelter. It could be used for other affordable housing. There are good ways to use those fees. So the good news is you have affordable housing partners. There's 3 to 4 of us working in this county. There's no better time for affordable housing with SB2 and SB3. SB2 is set to fund you on the basis of your urban county, so it's great that that was done. Those funds will be coming in through that HUD entitlement process, so you'll be getting a certain amount of funds on that. And I'm happy to volunteer to assist or provide technical assistance in the ad hoc committee in regard to a program to promote an affordable housing developer. We don't need to, and one other thing, I don't know, I think you do need to fill the position housing program manager, so you have someone focused on this. I don't believe it's been filled.
Go ahead. Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. My name is Luis Preciado. I'm with Midtown Housing Corporation. On behalf of Midtown, I want to thank Supervisor Luis for bringing this referral and all the supervisors and staff for preparing this report and the recommendations and for making a more intentional action or step to and focus on the actual, how to actually meet the housing production needs goal in our county. Not only by using the housing element plan and not only relying on the inclusionary housing ordinance. I think it's a great report and it has great ideas that meet and can help increase the arena housing numbers and affordable housing units available for all the various different income types and families that we serve. Regarding the 3-year short-term plan, I think there's tremendous value in there in identifying new sites and reconsidering the land use for the existing sites, prioritizing the sites, streamlining the process, using the overlay tools to position these projects for the future, which will be better positioned and well to compete with other applicants that will be coming after these funds once they are available. The county plays a very important role in housing, permanent supportive housing, and the overall health of the residents. I also think that it is great that the county is preparing to be ready for this future financing opportunities and trying to get projects shovel ready and entitled. I also think that it's important for the county to consider to keep current commitments to projects that are already under construction, such as our project, Moongate Plaza in Salinas, Chinatown. These projects take a lot of time to get them to that phase, And we relied on commitments to, continue delivering on the mission. And ready to partner and continue our partnership with other, with the county or other jurisdictions, for-profits or non-profits, to continue on that effort and to make sure that, these projects are successful and the residents are successful in our work. Thank you.
Chair, Board of Supervisors, staff, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. Lots of good information, lots of current good information to chew on. Let me just hit on a few items here, and also want to ask for my colleague Alfred Diaz-Ponte's time, since he wasn't able to make it. So. I did want to highlight that Cashville Oaks is certainly one of the huge priorities for the county, for Chispa, and for Monterey Bay Economic Partnership as an investment, one of our key investments. I think we should all look at it as a demonstration of the project. And in terms of potentially even allocating some particular staff time, like a laser beam, this is a perfect example of a site that makes sense. There's already some funding committed, there's entitlement effort, lots of energy for that. Let's make it happen sooner than later. What kind of things do we need to move out of the way to get it done? And there's plenty of other projects that can very easily be like that. We saw some of them today. Some of them obviously need some work, but any kind of site that we identify as a priority because it's next to services, it's compact development, it has already some components that work, let's get it done. And we're going to have to be bold. We're going to have to lock hands, work together, and the voices of no will have to work through that. Because the time is now. The farm worker study came out recently and put, another, added more weight to the scale in terms of 5,300 permanent housing opportunities that need to happen in the next 5+ years, right? In basically the short term. And so that to me is the difference between, we got to get this plan right. We have to identify the universe of opportunities that make sense. We're building a coalition of the willing to move that forward. And we also got to continue with the lower hanging fruit. So that's why we worked with several of you to start this ad hoc committee process, because for the employer sponsored piece, we can't just neglect that. We have to do a both and. It's not an either or. We need that to continue moving forward, because that takes pressure off of the other permanent and temporary housing stock that we have, the motels that aren't available for some of our homeless folks. And then, this afternoon, right, having that conversation about why that's impacted, why we have kids on the street. It's all connected. It's all connected. And this is about having a plan that, again, at least a plan. That's very different from reality, I get it, but let's at least have a plan that works and addresses our regional housing needs. It's unacceptable that we're this far along, almost halfway through the period, and we're now thinking and realizing that we only have, 6%, and, our plan is inadequate. If everything were good and we had a bucket of money and we had enough land, we wouldn't be able to achieve our basic needs. That's unacceptable. We can't repeat that mistake again. Let's get it right this time. We're looking for you to leadership. You have us as affordable housing advocates here, nonprofits, residents, business leaders coming together. Let's get it done. Thank you.
Chair, Board of Supervisors, good afternoon. I'll keep this short, seeing that it's almost, it's actually lunch already. I just wanted to say thank you to the Board of Supervisors and to the county staff for conducting this survey and for all the valuable information in the survey. We really do appreciate it. And I'm with the Housing Development Corporation. Thank you.
Hi, Wes White, Salinas resident, president of Salinas Homeless Union, so quite a bit of this kind of pertains. We were talking, or when folks mentioned the deputy sheriffs and firefighters that getting qualified. There's a lot of people who actually work and they do have cars, but they're too poor to afford rent. So I don't think, it becomes more a discrimination factor. Oh, they're too poor, so obviously they can't live here. So that kind of, I guess, it's determination and tenacity of people. When people do take care of their stuff, they can make it last and make investments. So they know how to do that. And it's just a matter of how we treat people. And I think that just offended me a little bit. That the other property owners want to opt out. I think it should be built, and because people can commute, they know how to commute. We have to do it every day. Even just going from Yeah, everything is a journey and experience just to do one errand. It seems like an email can take half hour, an hour, just to do something that was going to take 5 minutes. So I'd like to see that piece built, and yeah, keep on doing more affordable housing. Oh, that triangle right there, the Invest Triangle, you want to show everybody in the Fort Ord, please do so. You know, there's your property to affordable build, your Fort Ord utopia that you keep on trying to send all the homeless to. I do think it's ironic that there's we're trying to do retail on the bottom of 1220. That doesn't seem appropriate. You know, it seems out of our league, like that's what our tax revenue is for. So I don't see why we're going into business. So that seems a little weird. I do expect there to be a 4-story level. I thought we had 2¼ acres right there. And I thought we were using that for transitional housing, maybe even permanent housing for, you know, HUD or whatever. So, yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? So, you know, we'll bring this back for a motion, and as the maker of this referral, I wanted to make a motion to accept the report, the staff's report on the housing element, and also to adopt the short-term plan, but with the caveat that we should bring this back maybe in July or late June, so that to do one thing, to also make sure we include some of the, look at those MBET recommendations in their white paper, some goals around farm worker employer sponsored housing, our ADUs, the MBES property, and perhaps AB2 financing for that. And then we'll make the motion there, maybe add some friendly amendments for if some other of my colleagues want to add some. Oh, and then based on what Supervisor Parker said, also look at bringing back, transitioning the ad hoc farm worker employer housing ad hoc committee, and maybe doing we have to renew it to do just an ad hoc on housing after the work gets done for the farm worker employer sponsored housing. We include that as well. Anything else? Now, is there, we'll open it for discussion and a second as well. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I do have, I agree with some of the things that you're speaking specifically about. I really want to say that I think it's important that we prioritize achievable goals that we can get done versus a long list that we'd be talking about in a year. So I think focusing on identifying the priority sites for development and really working with the nonprofit home builders, as Jane Barr suggested. You know, they really know how to leverage the funds. Anyway, I think that would be important. And within that, really looking at where we can maximize transit-oriented development, cap and trade, all the various funding streams. Also, I think we need to be very careful about some of the opportunity sites that are listed on in our document here, because you know, things that are zoned for resource conservation could be highly contentious, as I believe was noted. You know, our general plan, we went through a rather laborious process to try to pinpoint where development should happen, and there are a number of sites on that list that just kind of throw all of that out the window. So I think we need to be very careful about that, but I think that really speaks to the transit-oriented development and cap and trade and the other kinds of funding that might be available. I think that all goes together. As has been mentioned, MBEP recommendations, many of the things that Jane Barr mentioned are those recommendations. And I also think, you know, especially the accessory dwelling units. And one idea that popped into my mind, I don't know if this is possible, but I'm curious about being able to have people be able to use Section 8 vouchers as part of ADUs, and is there a way to do project-based Section 8 with accessory dwelling units? I don't know, but it's a way to get around the limited number of Section 8 vouchers that we've got. Update the in-lieu fee, for goodness sake, to reflect the actual cost to build an affordable unit. I think really making sure we're looking at options for local sources of funding in order to, it's that layering and leveraging of the state funding, but I think there may be some local things. And then updating the county's inclusionary housing ordinance so that it conforms to the 2010 general plan. That's, 8 years overdue, and I think getting that done would be a really good thing. So I appreciate the general direction. I just want to make sure that we're really focusing on the things that are going to move us into action, and so that we're not just saying the same things for years and years, as we have been doing with arena numbers. So thank you.
Yeah, and it just already included in attachment 7 is updating the county's inclusionary housing ordinance to conform to state law and the 2010 general plan. Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of the farm worker housing, the last time we had the Joe survey, it was only 200 million. And I know this county did very well drawing some of those funds, and I know Chief worked on some of those projects. So we need to do that in tandem with trying to get some credit for the county for meeting our housing element units. That would be, I think, another incentive to work with our ag companies to make sure that we continue supporting and encouraging that type of housing. I think those would be the ones, but I think also in terms of prioritizing those parcels that can give us a significant number, it's important. I mean, you can nickel and dime it with some of the smaller ones, but as Matt was saying, the Castroville project should be a for joy because they can give us significant number. There's other parcels that he showed us. I think if you prioritize them, get them ready for the potential shovel-ready projects, I think that can help us draw some, I think, hopefully more significant dollars for the housing plan.
Thank you.
I agree with what you said, but especially with the Castroville project, I mean, that's one that I think we can just get and move forward and have the support of the departments that we move it forward and get there, and especially doing that in conjunction with the 156 interchange. I mean, it's ideal.
Supervisor Adams. No comments?
Mr. Chair, sorry, I seem to think of more things. I did want to just express my appreciation for possibly rededicating and turning the farm worker ad hoc committee into the general affordable housing one, but I don't know if the farm worker subcommittee is done. There may be some ongoing work there. I also think that for the affordable housing, it would be important to have a representative on the ad hoc committee from the Monterey Peninsula, since the peninsula has a great deal of responsibility for some of this jobs, housing balance, and building the affordable housing.
I think, and also a member of the Board of Supervisors.
To be on that committee as well.
On the housing commission.
Oh, well, the Housing Advisory Council or Commission. Yeah, that's
the right direction to bring. Let's just including the motion, the right direction after the ad hoc farm worker housing committee is done to immediately bring back and to the full board for a housing ad hoc committee, and then we can decide new members then, and also sooner than that we can agendize bringing appointing a member of the Board of Supervisors to the Housing Commission.
Right, and that might be enough, I don't know, to take, that might be our ad hoc housing advisory.
Okay, so let's include those in the motion and also include prioritizing some sites, including Jane Barr's recommendations, as she was mentioning several things. And then I would say for the legislative committee would be to look at the 2 tweaks in statute for our next legislative package, which is being able to include in arena numbers the ADU units and the farm worker housing units. That would be something for Nick Chulos and I to agendize, and Supervisor Adams to agendize for a future legislative meeting.
Okay. Very good. And for, could I ask permission to maybe include the farm worker housing task force or ad hoc, build that into this plan and return to you with their roles into this plan? Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, there's been a motion. Do I have a second? Second by Salinas. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor? Aye. Motion carries unanimously.